15 people joining us so far. Different folks coming from Adidas, Southampton, Wigan, Portsmouth, other side of New Forest. Hi, Kev Barton. Welcome. Um, this is an exciting moment. I always find these moments just before we start off any presentation always quite nerve-wracking. Mostly because I think, we're trying to make sure everyone has a really sincere time, and a conversation. But it's also a little bit tech heavy as well. So join us. We're just going to wait a couple of people coming in, but please do keep using the chat and make sure you can see us clearly. This session is being recorded to let everybody know as well. And the goal here isn't just to record the session, but also make it available for people who can't attend, who may be also people who can listen to some of the things that you might give feedback on. We really are keen for everybody that's involved in today's conversation to be really thinking about how the Disability Employment Charter can really transform the country and your organisations, and how our own work around the inclusion passports called Access can support that, and if it plays a role in supporting any of these things at all. So I'm just going to start with the housekeeping, which is to keep the microphones muted. People can definitely share their camera if they want to, but and I'm quite happy with that. But just to keep the microphones muted is important. And to raise the questions in the chat box or raise your hand as you will. We're all learning as well. So, and I will stress this, there are no bad questions. We're dealing with a lot of social change and at times a lot of historic social wrongdoings. And we're here to address those, both as a community and as a team, and as people just joining these kind of conversations. But we cannot get there without people really having the space to share what they feel and how they can be part of that change. So by that, I really mean that this is a safe and open place for inclusive learning and a space that's shared for everybody. And I hope we're all feeling that. If there's any objections to, yes,
just to jump in, there is a situation where the cameras and the microphones are muted. And we can't remove that at the moment. So I suggest anyone has any questions, please do ask it in the Q&A box or the chat box, and just we can go by that method this session. That'd be great.
Okay, great. And now I'm going to start really the proceedings, as it were, and just start with a gentle introduction to myself. My name's Atif Choudhury. Some of you have been following a lot of the work that I do at Disability Rights UK, as well as Zaytoon, which is an organisation supporting Palestinian families and farmers through fair trade. And you're also, I'm sure, tuned in here today because of the work that we do at Calling All Minds, which focuses on neurodiversity inclusion and disability inclusion around the world. I'm an advisor to the United Nations World Food Programme on their roadmap called UNDIS, which is a roadmap for the UN to meet the Sustainable Development Goals themselves and make sure that they are building the very work towards a human rights model on disability inclusion. I also get to advise the World Health Organization on rapid assistive technologies, and I'm personally really excited to do this work, not just from my own lived experiences of facing barriers as a youngster around neurodiversity, and particularly with dyslexia and ADHD, but also just because I enjoy it. I really enjoy how we bring together people with who are experiencing some of their realities that we all need to learn from, and how we make safer spaces for people to share those realities. And with that in mind, I want to hand over to somebody I've enjoyed meeting, very much so. Um, I don't gently say it, but I think what I like on this road that I'm on is meeting what I think mischievous folks, who care a lot. And Kim, when I met him, I realized, okay, and we got to meet each other at Google headquarters, and it was an exciting day. And I realized I'd met a new mischievous folk who is also a doer. And so I'm going to introduce over to Kim, because Kim's very, and what Kim does is really central to the conversation we're going to have today and what Kim's fighting for. Whether it's mischievous or not, you can decide. But I'm going to hand over to Kim to introduce Kim Hoque. Kim, would you fire away?
Yeah, hi, Atif. I can't really follow that up. Being described as mischievous, I think is, yeah, I like that. That will keep me going for a little while to think that I'm sort of perceived in that way. Yeah, so first off, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak today. It's great to have that opportunity to bring the Charter to the attention of a new audience. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as it says on the screen, I mean, I have a day job, which is that I'm a Professor of Human Resource Management at King's College London. I'm Vice Dean for People and Culture in the Business School. I've also spent, in terms of the Disability Employment Charter, I mean, in many ways, which we'll talk about obviously in a lot more depth later, but that stems from the research that I've been doing with disability at work, which I was involved in setting up probably about 12 years ago now. And, you know, doing research in the disability field is something that I've been doing for, you know, probably a little bit longer than that. And it's been great from the point of view of the Charter, because that's galvanised a lot of the policy asks that has come out of our research, has gone into the Charter, and is now hopefully having an impact in terms of pushing the debates forward around policy at national level.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I would ask a couple of questions. I'm going to ask questions to Kim, and I'm going to ask you as an audience listening to this as well. But I'd really first want to see if you use a chat as well, is ask one question to you is, how many of you listening today have come across the Charter? That's really important to me to find out as well, because we want to see, what are your motivations? Have you seen what the Charter is doing? And it's okay to say no, it's new to you, and that's really why you're here. And that works just as well. So what we're going to explore today is a question. The Disability Employment Charter sets out a clear vision of fairness, advocating for the introduction of robust government policies and systems that make it real. That's really what today is about. Kim, would you say that's a fair synopsis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that ultimately we're you know, we're in a situation where we are wanting to bring about more robust disability employment policy. Something in many ways that I've personally been attempting to do. I mean, I've been kind of knocking around the disability world from a policy point of view since probably around about 2016. The Charter's been in existence from 2021. So, I mean, it came into existence in part because it was the culmination of a lot of that policy, those efforts we were making to affect government policy. So it's been an extension of that in terms of driving that forward. So it's absolutely about advocating for the introduction of more robust government policy, and just, you know, leveraging the fact that the Charter now has so much support for it in terms of really trying to drive that forward.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask some questions as we go forward. They are designed really to bring your own understanding of what the Charter means, what its goals are, and whether tools like the Access Passport may be able to help it along the way. And those are questions we can sort of say for as we go through. But I would ask all of you is to, as we said, is just engage. Use the chat as you want to. If the things that spark out that you really want to talk about, or just say, well, how, in what way? I really want to make space for that. We've got roughly about 45 minutes to do that. So this is your session really. So, Kim, for you, and I suppose I'm going to ask this on a personal level as well for you, as well as a work one, if I'm going to tease that out. I always think that when things are real great innovations, I always want to know not just what it is, but what's the passion for it? You know, where did it come from, and who are the people behind that passion? So I guess my question is, in that sense, why was the Disability Employment Charter created for you?
Okay, Atif, just before we start, I can see there's a couple of people have responded, whether they've seen it or not. There's a couple that say they have, one say they haven't. So please, as I'm talking, please do Google it and go on the website and just take a look at it. You'll be able to see on the website a lot of what the Charter is actually all about. And, you know, that will make it a lot clearer, I think, in terms of when I'm talking it through. So, I mean, essentially in terms of why it was created, well, I mean, like I say, I mean, I can sort of take you through the story really in terms of my efforts to impact in the policy space. I mean, you know, going back to 2016, that was when I first got involved in doing work around disability policy, largely through the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Disability. We collaborated with Disability Rights UK to essentially, they asked us to write a report in terms of how to address the disability employment gap. We wrote the report. It was called Ahead of the Arc. The person we were working with at Disability Rights UK, a guy called Philip Connolly, he was absolutely fantastic from the point of view of, you know, knocking on doors, getting us into meetings that we wouldn't otherwise expect to get into. So that was my first introduction really into the policy world. But I think you realise very early on in terms of trying to affect change that it's not linear and it's not easy. And it is literally like wading through the thickest treacle you can possibly imagine. It's glacially slow. And like I say, it's not linear because sometimes you can forge relationships with civil servants in a given department. We used to have great links in HM Treasury, for example. They've all just gone now because the people we're talking to have just moved on. They're in other roles. So from that point of view, it can be slow, and it can also, like I say, you're not necessarily you will be taking steps back at times. But anyway, I mean, I you know, despite that, I think we made a reasonable fist, I think, in terms of trying to get what we were calling for onto the radar of the right sort of people. But come to around about 2020, that was the point at which the government said, right, we want to introduce a national disability strategy. And, you know, this was announced with great fanfare that the government wanted to do this. Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister at the time, said that this is something we want to be ambitious and transformative, a once in a generation opportunity for a reset for disabled people. So we thought, well, great, you know, if that's really what they mean, this is a golden opportunity with the links that we've developed across Cabinet Office, across DWP, elsewhere, to go back and say, right, you've got this strategy coming up. These are the sorts of things that we think should go in it. Right. So we had a number of meetings with who we thought, you know, with probably the right sort of people, you know, the officials that were playing a role in terms of developing the national disability strategy. And, you know, there was a kind of a bit of a sense of, well, you know, look, they were very polite, you know, they listened very intently to what we had to say. But ultimately, we didn't come out, at least I didn't come out of those meetings feeling that we'd made the progress we wanted to make in terms of landing our policy asks. So, and a lot of this was sort of, you know, you get this a lot in the academic world. It was sort of, you know, well, thank you very much for coming down from your ivory tower and telling us about the research that you've been doing, which is very interesting from an abstract and theoretical perspective. But in the real world, you know, not entirely sure how the sorts of proposals that you're making would, you know, land even within the disability community, let alone with employers. So we're really not sure that this is the way forward. So, you know, we got the sense that, you know, DWP in particular, you know, they saw what we were calling for as being a bit left field, not really something that was realistic, not something that would necessarily help. As you can imagine, I wasn't massively happy with that as a response. So that was the point at which I went and had a chat with, it was actually Fazile Hardy, who I'm sure you will know, Atif, and I'm sure other people on the call will know as well, who's the policy manager at Disability Rights UK. And I said, well, look, you know, when you go and talk to government, what sort of stuff do you talk to them about? You know, what sort of things do you call for? And she said, well, you know, we'll call for mandatory reporting, we'll call for reform of access to work, we'll call for reform of disability confidence and so on. I thought, well, you know, look, this is exactly the same sorts of things that we talk about when we go and talk to government. Yet at the same time, you know, we kind of get the sense from the officials that we talk about that, you know, they all sort of say, well, it's all terribly difficult for us because, you know, your asks aren't the same as other people's asks. And, you know, when they come and talk to us, they don't say the same sort of things as you. But talking to Fazile, it was quite clear that we're on the same page in terms of the sorts of things that we thought government should do. So in many ways, I mean, the idea for the charter was something I'd had a couple of years before then, but hadn't really done anything with it. And that was the point at which I pitched the idea of a charter to her. And I said, well, look, you know, if it's the case that we are in broad agreement in terms of what government should be doing, if it's the case government doesn't appreciate that that's the case, why don't we come together, you know, you and I, as Disability at Work, which is, you know, my research organisation, and Disability Rights UK, put together a group of founders to work on creating a charter. And if we can get other people to sign up to it, then this is going to send a message to government that they're just not going to be able to ignore. They're going to, you know, we will be able to say, look, you know, it's not just us, but we've got all these other people who are supporting the sorts of proposals that we're making. There is consensus out there in terms of appetite for greater or more robust government policy. And there's also a great deal of consensus in terms of what that policy should comprise. Now, Fazile really liked the idea, and she said, yes, let's do this. Let's pull together a founders group. And literally within the space of a week, she got Leonard Cheshire involved. She got Scope involved. We also pulled in the Shaw Trust, the DFN Charitable Foundation, and Unison as well. Unison are absolutely key part of this, and of course the University of Warwick is also one of the founder members, which is where I was working at the time. So even just pulling that group of founders together was a real positive step forward, because, you know, having people like Scope and Leonard Cheshire involved, you've got some big players on board right from the start. So we came together. We wrote the charter actually remarkably quickly, because despite government saying, oh, well, everybody's not in agreement in terms of what we should be doing, but there was actually a remarkable consensus between us in terms of the sorts of things that should go in there. In terms of exactly how we should express it, condense it down so that it was a reasonable length and so on, I mean, that took a bit more work, but it wasn't too much at all, if I'm honest. And that was a really, really encouraging start. The fact that just simply within the founders that there was relative overlap in terms of that. There was real consensus in terms of what we thought should go in the charter. So that takes us to about the summer of 2021. That's the point at which we said, right, let's take this to our networks and see if we can get anybody to sign it. And that was a very, very nervous moment, because, of course, you know, you sort of think we're effectively going public with this now. It may well be the case that other people will look at it and just laugh at us and say, oh, this is just utterly pointless, utterly futile. We don't agree with what you're trying to do. We don't agree with the proposals, etc., etc. But that was just not the reaction that we got at all. So we launched it in 2021, in October of 2021, with 37 signatories at the point of launch, which I thought was a reasonable start. There was a launch event that the Shaw Trust hosted. There were people on a panel for this launch event, including Cameron Malik, of course, who's the CEO of Disability Rights UK, Steve Ingham, who at the time was a CEO of Page Group, Shani Danda, who, of course, is a really big name in the disability field that I'm sure you've all heard of. And I actually had COVID at the time chairing this thing. I was sitting there with a blanket around my knees on the screen, sort of trying not to shiver while chairing this thing. But I was absolutely blown away by the sorts of things that the panelists were saying about what we were trying to achieve. And I just thought, this is incredible. These people really get it, what it is that we're trying to do. We're not just sort of saying, look, isn't it dreadful? Look at the size of the disability employment gap or the pay gap or whatever else. They really get what we're trying to do in terms of driving government policy forward. And in fact, if I'd actually written those panelists' speeches for them, I don't think they would have been as complimentary about the charter as they actually were. And that, you know, massively put the wind in our sails from the point of view of saying, we're onto something here. This is something that can, you know, potentially people are going to galvanise around. This is something which could really drive policy debate and policy change forward. At the same time, we also got some coverage in The Independent of the launch from James Moore, who's a journalist on The Independent. And that immediately, once you start getting into the national press, that puts you onto the radar of government pretty quickly. So literally within a couple of weeks of the charter coming into existence, we had a meeting with Chloe Smith, who was the disability minister at the time, who wanted to find out more. She actually made reference directly to the charter in a speech that he made from the dispatch box in the Commons, literally just a couple of weeks after it had launched, which was just fantastic, really, to have. That's exactly what we wanted it to do, was to get the sorts of proposals that we were calling for onto the radar of government ministers, and that was a really good starting point. So it went from there, really. I mean, I can talk to you a little bit later on, Atif, if you want, about some of the things that we've actually achieved with it and where we've got to it in terms of the signatory base and so on. But yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea in terms of why we actually created the thing.
Absolutely. And I honestly, I found the passion really infectious. It's nice to hear names, because these are names that are dear to me as well. Cameron, particularly, I was on the board for Disability Rights UK for 6 years. And of course, Shani and all the folks you mentioned are true pioneers in this country on how we get this right, that it isn't about people with disabilities, it's about disablement, and how we collectively own that responsibility, not just because of it's empirically designed within a social model, but because this is about barriers, and we will all collectively face them in the civil society we live in. And that does bring me to a question really around the gap itself. So those of you who may be sort of thinking about the charter and the disability employment gap, the disability employment gap itself, and I'm going to ask him to sort of explain it a little bit, just for, it might be a challenge for some of you, but it's roughly about, from my research, but also from memory, it's about 28%, unless Kim will say challenge that, it's about 28%. What that really means is that the gap between disabled people having equitable opportunities to choose employment versus their non-disabled colleagues is at 28%. That's a huge gap of people being able to say, look, I want the same choices as everybody else. There's another gap, which is the pay gap, which is different. I'm going to ask him really sort of share with me whether how you see the charter in its intent over the next 5 to 10 years challenging those numbers, and if those numbers are correct in your eyes.
Yeah, no, they are. So I mean, these are figures that are, you know, national figures that are taken from the labour force survey, so they're pretty accurate. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the disability employment gap at the moment is around about 29%, which means essentially it means that just over half of disabled people of working age are in work, in comparison with over 80% of non-disabled people. So there you can see a massive disparity. That gap hasn't shrunk at all since round about the middle of 2019. So, sorry, 2020. So just before the pandemic started onwards, for the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen no improvement in the disability employment gap statistics. In terms of the pay gap, if anything, that's actually got worse over time. So if we look at the figures going back to around about 2013, the pay gap then was estimated to be just under 12%. Some of the figures now are looking at figures around about 14%. So we're not moving in the right direction. You know, hence our argument as to why we need government to just think again, really, in terms of the approach that it's taking. From the point of view of, you know, that's exactly what the Charter's looking to do. And, you know, as you put on the slide, Atif, I mean, the principles that it enshrines, I mean, around fairness, dignity, equal opportunity, of course, those are the underpinning principles. But I think one of the key things about the Charter is that it's very much focused on the demand side. An awful lot of government policy is focused on supply issues around, in particular, what can you do with the benefit system, which of course is very, very highly contentious in terms of encouraging job-seeking activity among disabled people. What are referred to as labour market activation policies. What can you do to get disabled people off work and into job-seeking activity? And our argument and the ethos underpinning the Charter is to say, well, look, you know, you can do what you want on the supply side. You can put the best supply side initiatives into place in the world. But if you don't have employers that are genuinely willing to break down barriers in their workplaces, they're not willing to make both hiring and employment processes more accessible to disabled people, it ain't going to make any difference at all. So it's that focus on employers. What can government do to support, encourage, and in some senses require employers to up their game from the point of view of their treatment of disabled people? And that, in many ways, is one of the key things that underpins the Charter.
Mm. And so, do you? I won't share with us because it's very new. But in terms of employers themselves meeting the intent behind the chart, what do you think is going to be one of the? What would you say would be one of the perhaps the biggest obstacles we may be facing, and what might we collectively need to do? Those listening today, and those listening to the recording might play a role in changing.
Yeah, well, I mean, just in terms of some of the evidence, I mean, we've done research around this issue in terms of exactly what equality policies in relation to disability look like across UK organisations. So, I mean, you know, drawing on government data, you know, this is nationally representative, large-scale data. We did one piece of work which looks at the extent to which organisations have adopted in a range of different disability equality policies. So this is all practices. So this is things like, do you monitor and review your promotion and selection procedures by disability? Do you have special procedures in place to reach out to disabled people when you're hiring for job roles as they become available? Do you review your workplace from the point of view of accessibility and so on? So we actually look at 7 practices in total. And what we find is that out of those 7 practices, on average, organisations have implemented just 1.1 out of those 7 practices. Now, what's particularly interesting about that is that the vast majority of them will say when asked, do you have an equal opportunities policy statement that makes reference to disability? Most organisations will say, oh, yeah, we've got that. We've got the statement of intent and we've got, the nice glossy written policy as such. But when you actually lift the lid on that and say, well, what are the actual substantive practices that will actually make a difference to turn that into a policy of substance? An awful lot of organisations have very little to say for themselves. So this is what we refer to as the empty shell. So a lot of disability equality policies, we would argue in the UK, are still empty shells. You lift the lid on them and there's very little of substance underneath the bonnet, so to speak. And I always find it amazing, you can go along to sort of events in Parliament or practitioner events elsewhere, and very often employers will talk about the sorts of things that they've just introduced or are introducing now. And my thought is always, well, you're only just doing this. If you come along and talk to us 2 years ago, would you have said, well, actually, we're doing absolutely nothing at all? And I think there's an awful lot of that. There's an awful lot of that goes on. And I think also when people come along and talk about what they're doing or what they're introducing now, you always get a sense of, well, is this a statement of intent? Are you actually doing this? Is this something which is actually going to become embedded in your organisation? Or could you come back and talk to us in a couple of years' time and, this nice shiny initiative that you tell us that you're trying to implement now, you will say, well, we never really got it off the ground, senior management withdrew their support for it. We didn't get the resources and so on to really make it work. So, and this is often large household name organisations. And it just brings home, if they're not really putting their money where their mouth is and really putting substantive policy into place, then what can we expect of medium-sized organizations, organizations across a range of different industry sectors. So I think there's still, let's face it, if organizations were all doing the right thing, we wouldn't need the charter, we wouldn't have a disability employment gap, we wouldn't have a disability pay gap. So a lot of this is about what can be done to address that, so that we actually see employers introducing policy which is more robust in nature and will be breaking down barriers for disabled people.
Brilliant. There's so much of this, Kim. Really, it really is. I'm going to just add a couple of points as well to my mind as well, that I share a kind of, I don't know if it's a healthy cynicism, and I suspect if I think of my good sort of friends in this work, especially the mischievous ones, that cynicism sort of moves depending on the day they're having and the people they're with, and I sometimes think there are, I'm conscious it's Dyslexia Awareness Week, for example, and we have calendar weeks, it's ADHD month per se, and so we have sometimes organizations putting a spotlight, which is a good thing, on different events, but there is a balance between those spotlights being PR exercises or being real intent, and to a certain extent maybe they have to be both in order to be real. But I strongly urge people to look at the charter that makes that intent real, to signing up to it. Those of you listening today, again, please sign up to it. But I have one question as well for us as an audience, and then I want to take a question that Julius Salmons has written, which is to share the 7 practices that you mentioned, Kim. But before you do that, I want to just share something that I generally believe that a lot of organisations, they act as if the 1995 Discrimination Act is in place, and that's what guides them, that they're not allowed to discriminate, and if they do, they're in trouble. And to an extent, yes, that's true, because that's still part of the Equalities Act. But the biggest part of the Equalities Act is really about, or not the biggest, but certainly an important one, is the anticipatory duties of it. That organisations have to anticipate that people will have reasons to share differences, and they'll have good reason to hide them. And it's their role to practice that anticipatory duties within the Equalities Act. And I guess my question is, if the corporates who need to be particularly compliant don't do this, then you're right, the small medium enterprises don't necessarily get to do it as well. But the country is made up of small medium enterprises. The country's economy is, I think, Kim, you'll correct me. I know this is you're a professor in this field, but I think it's roughly about 75% of the UK economy is SME versus the corporates who aren't that much more than 15. Is that not correct? And does the corporates doing it really trickle down to the SMEs? Over to you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, SMEs are a big part of the picture. I mean, interestingly, I mean, there tends to be, at least you find this in policy circles, people will spend a lot of time saying, well, large corporates, we know they're doing the right thing. They come in and tell us about what they're doing. But I mean, that's partly because they get the platform to come in and talk about what they're doing. And the Federation of Small Business has made this point as well. When you actually look at what goes on in small businesses and the percentage of the workforce that is disabled and disabled people's experience of work, it's actually better in small firms. They typically employ proportionately more disabled people. And also the experiences of disabled people as well is just as there's no evidence that it's any worse in an SME than elsewhere.
Wow.
But I think they tend to do it differently, because small firms are more informal. But that informality can actually be very, very helpful from the point of view of somebody who needs reasonable adjustments, because if you need an adjustment, the boss knows you, probably sees you as a mate, probably see, there is an interpersonal relationship there. And that's what will drive things, rather than going into an HR process and going to occupational health. And then it goes into a system where you then sort of get the budget for the, and before you know it, it's taken months before the organisation has actually come back to you about whether or not you're going to get your reasonable adjustment or otherwise, which is exactly what Unison show in their research. One of the things that they've demonstrated is an awful lot of reasonable adjustment requests just disappear into the ether. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there are differences between SMEs and large firms, differences of approach as well.
Well, what you're touching on, which I feel philosophically maybe, but I actually generally feel it as well, is that the most disabling thing on earth is poverty, because it affects the choices that we get to make or not make, or people get to make. But it's also attitudes being the second. I think that the attitudes that we have about each other or ourselves that stops us even making a request. To make an adjustment request requires a certain degree of esteem and self-esteem. Say I matter and I matter enough to do this, or when I make this request, I won't get fired, or when I make this request, I won't be seen as a burden or a hassle. Now, I think for everybody making these requests, on some level or another, those things do go into people's minds, whoever they are, I think. But they're compounded further when you're impacted by insecure employment or attitudes of not seeing like a team player and such and such. The charter can change that, I think, because these attitudes have to be about everyday belonging, that people will show up differently, that it isn't about people with disabilities, but it is at times about barriers. And how do we collectively own that? I have a question which as a provocation, and I'm really going to invite the floor to ask questions as well. Please do use the chat and see what things that you think would make the charter just stronger for you. Or do you feel like it's going to be something that can actually work?
Well, I mean, should I talk about what we have actually achieved?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're at a stage now. I mentioned earlier that we had 37 signatures at launch. We're now nearly at 300. So we've got all the main charities signed up to it, the likes of Sense, MenCap, National Autistic Society, and so on. We've also got a growing number of large corporates as well. So Coca-Cola, your Pacific Partners, have signed up to it. DPD UK, Adecco, Schroders, McDonald's. So, we've got some big names amongst those 300. And of course, a lot of this is, once you've got those signatories on board, which is, fantastic to have and absolutely essential from the point of view, we need to grow that signatory base as well, because we need to demonstrate to government that support for us is continuing to rise. Thank you very much for the shout out earlier, Atif, to people on the call to very, very seriously think about signing up to the Charter. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'll be more than happy to talk you through how to do that. It's completely free to sign. All you've got to do is send over your logo to us and we'll add it to the website. And, you know, at that point you're signed up. So, but I mean, in terms of what we have achieved, I mean, under the last government, I mean, as you know, Atif, in the policy space, things are glacially slow. And it has been under both governments, to be honest with you. But under the previous government, we got £3 million into the spring budget from 2023 for a supported internship pilot that was negotiated in part through the Disability Employment Charter. The government also had a light touch review of disability confidence a couple of years ago as well. And the two organisations that were listed, well, the three organisations that were listed as being the organisations that the DWP was looking to respond to in that review. One was the Work and Pension Select Committee. Another was a Centre for Social Justice Disability Commission, and the third was the Disability Employment Charter. And I was absolutely blown away to see us listed next to those other really, really highly respected stakeholders. And that's when I sort of, I've had civil servants say to me, look, you have made us think again about the sorts of things that we can and should be doing. You've demonstrated the support and the appetite out there for us to go further in terms of disability policy. And the fact that we were named on that document, I think, is testimony to that they kind of get it. They understand what it is that we're trying to do, and they understand that the support that we've demonstrated for more robust government policy, it's just simply something that they can't ignore. I mean, under the new government as well. So, I mean, like I said earlier, it's really, really great to be working with Unison. Unison have a very close relationship with Labour. So several of our asks made their way into Labour's general election manifesto, courtesy of Unison, just pushing really, really hard to make that happen. They did a fantastic job, if I'm honest. So we currently have in the offing the Equality, Race and Disability Bill, which is we don't have a definite, but it's likely to be introducing mandatory disability employment and pay gap reporting. Now, again, I've had it said to me in the corridors of power, nobody will ever put this in writing, but I've had it said to me that the fact that disability pay gap reporting is coming in at the same time as ethnicity pay gap reporting is in part down to our efforts. The general understanding was that ethnicity pay gap reporting would come first, simply because people have been calling for it for longer. And if that works, then we might have a shot at getting disability pay gap and employment reporting introduced as well. And the fact that the two are coming side by side is as a result of the appetite that we have demonstrated to government through the Charter for that to happen. So it's just absolutely wonderful to hear that if we've actually played in our own small way a role in terms of accelerating that progress, that's exactly the sort of thing that we want to see.
That's incredible. I hope folks can sit with that, because again, it reinforces it's about barriers. Do you know that there is an ethnicity pay gap? Actually, I mean, I'm just saying this now that I'm Bengali of background, and so is Kim. I know, if I may say, and Bengalis, historically we are the lowest on employment. Historically, it's changing, but in terms of employment pay gap, as an ethnic group in this country, we have been the lowest. And so I think it's quite, if I can use the word, delicious that we're two people of Bengali descent sort of doing this work and challenging it. And I just want to share that on a personal level. But I also have a position on this that, yeah, we have to get there because it is about barriers. And one of the things that really people have to take away, and I'm going to go to the questions, that isn't about robbing participation from people, but which ought to be enough, to be fair. But it's really about actually harming a civil society that has not got to grips with what it could be learning, what it could be really gaining from. That as a leader, when I reach out to the most marginalized person in a room, two things get to happen. One of them incredible, but the first one is that I've reached out to more of the room, and that's what charters can do and ideas can do. But the second, if I've done it really well, is that I'll discover that the person I thought was the most marginalized person in the room wasn't. It was somebody else who wasn't going to share that, but they decided to unmask because of the intent and the aspirations of the call or the meeting and the approach that we just had. That's what accessibility can do when it's done well. it benefits everybody, not just the individual, but everybody. But to do that well, we have to build a culture that gets excited by differences, not endures them, not because of compliance, but because of the debt we owe to the differences that live within our civil society. And the Charter can do that for me. I think that the Access Passport is a tool which I'm going to touch on a little bit together as we do this. And Kim, I'm grateful to say, is one of our advisories to help us in that work. But I want to pause for a moment that we have to recognize that so many people, including CEOs, hide their differences. That often people will go for job interviews knowing full well there's an impairment that they probably should say, but they're not going to. And it's not because the organization they're taking a job, applying a job for, doesn't care. It's because historically places they've worked in haven't cared. That historically it's affected their promotions or their sense of support or their sense of identity in that workplace. This has to change, because if we don't change this, then every HR leader is really chasing an idea that they're somehow expected to be psychic. They're supposed to just know what somebody's hiding. But in truth, they won't know, so they won't get it right. But likewise, we can't assume people should just tell us things because we care. We shouldn't assume that we've got the right for them to disclose everything about them when they themselves aren't sure if we've done the work to make it safe. So this is where the Charter really matters. Because when you see organizations signed up to a Charter and you're going for a job interview with them, or you're seeing an organization signed up to an inclusion passport because they want to understand barriers better, then they're giving you the cues. They're doing the psychological work to say, we get this. We don't get it perfect, but we get why it matters. And this is why the Charter can change the disability employment gap in this lifetime. It can move it from 28% in this lifetime because, just like an inclusion passport could, it shows that it's not about people with disabilities. It's not a medical model, but rather a biosocial one that can tackle barriers because people are finding safety in talking about them. And the Charter is a big signal towards that. So I'm going to chuck the questions to the floor, and I'll put a link to the Access Passport in this as well, just so there's not a little bit of time on that. But the focus is really about the Charter and how we make that real for everybody. But I'll put a go on, Kim.
Atif, no, I was going to say there's some interesting questions in the chat. I mean, there's somebody who wanted to know what it's actually 9 rather than 7, the different principles are. I mean, these are things like employment and pay gap reporting, supporting disabled people into employment through supported internships, supported employment, and so on. Reform of access to work, reform of disability confidence, leveraging government procurement, and so on. Now, I don't want to spend ages talking about each of those, but what I would encourage you to do is to go onto the Charter website, where you can read the Charter itself and each of the 9 asks. And there's also an FAQ section on the website as well, which gives you a bit of an understanding in terms of the underpinning of each of those as well. But I think there's another question in the chat about how we know businesses are actually living up to the terms of the Charter, which I think is a really, really important issue.
Great question,
you get a wide variety. I mean, some of the organisations that I work with have been absolutely brilliant from the point of view. I mean, Waltham Council is one, right? They've taken the Charter and taken every single point, and they've developed an entire action plan in terms of how that translates to the local level. So it's impacting on their employees, and it's also impacting on people who reside within the borough. Just absolutely wonderful to see that. I've had other organisations that have invited me to come in and give talks, and to sort of, one organisation said, look, we want you to talk to our sales force because they talk to employers. They can actually get more people signed up for you, and they can actually use that, So another organisation which has we get people who put them all over their website and that sort of thing. So it's really, really great. But one organisation I want to emphasise is a entertainment industry production company that we've just started working with called Outlier. And Atif, you said that one of the great things about working in this space is it just gets you onto the radar of people that you would never imagine you would meet. Now, the 3 founders of Outlier. One is a singer-songwriter from Australia called Emmanuel Kelly, who, you know, is very, very famous in Australia. He's an Australian X Factor. His performance had 500 million social media hits. So, you know, this guy's he's a bona fide pop star, basically. You know, it's just absolutely wonderful to be working with him. Another is Joanne Ray, who is a former BBC film executive, and the other founder is Chris Martin from Coldplay. So just to get on the radar of people like that is absolutely fantastic. Now, again, the fact that they signed, the idea that Chris Martin knows about the charter and has agreed to sign it in itself is just absolutely wonderful. But we're actually now working with them really, really closely from the point of view of, you know, the way that we can actually drive things forward together, both within the film and TV industry itself, and also from the point of view of what they can do to promote the charter. And of course, given the fact that they're in that position where they can sprinkle a degree of stardust over what we do, that can just bring things to a much wider attention, you know, the attention of a much wider group of people. They've got the ability to make disability employment a sexy topic, to actually make it something that people out there will really care about. If Chris Martin says that he cares about this stuff, all of a sudden a whole heap of other people are going to care about it as well. So that's one organisation I'm absolutely loving working with at the moment, and I'm just really, really excited to see where that collaboration goes. So I would encourage you, so do Google Outlier. It's Outlyer. You'll be able to find out a little bit about more what they do. Emmanuel Kelly himself is an absolute superstar. He actually appeared with Coldplay at the FIFA Club World Cup, in the Club World Cup semi-final show. So he was on stage with Chris Martin there. And he also opened for Coldplay on the Sphere of the Music of the Spheres tour as well last year. So, I mean, just having the you know, the opportunity to, and you know, the fact that we're working with these people now is just an absolute privilege.
That's brilliant, Kim. I really like that, and it's great that Coldplay are backing it. Really, I suppose they've become very famous again for other things recently, and I'm impressed.
Emmanuel actually said to me, so Coldplay's manager is a guy called Phil Harvey. He said that he's beyond impressed with the work that we're doing. So, you know, to get that endorsement from Coldplay's manager, you know, that kind of keeps you going for quite a while.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I'm going to just chuck a couple of questions in to make sure. There's the question that I really did love. So, in a way, I suppose you've answered it. It's the example I did like, which was about, you know, getting the signatories of the charter to adhere to the ethos of the charter. So, I suppose if you were thinking about maybe some of the giant companies that you've mentioned, I mean, it's great that they are joining the charter. Absolutely. I work a lot in fair trade with the hat I wear for fair trade in Palestine. But you do look at organizations that have signed up to fair trade, but you also look at how they may challenge fair trade where they need to at times to make it more impactful, but also whether it can co-opt things. So my question is, could a big organizations that have signed up to it, could they dilute the charter in any way? And I think that's the audience. I want them to hear that answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a little bit of self-selection that goes on here because, of course, you know, it's not the case that everybody we approach about the charter signs it, right? And there's some very, very big name high street corporates, I won't mention their names, that we've approached and had discussions at the highest level, even at boardroom level. And they have ultimately decided not to sign because they say, right, we need to get our own house in order first before we put our name to something like this. We shouldn't be telling government what to do because we're not actually comfortable with what we're actually doing ourselves. So, yeah, there is a strong element of that. But I mean, I think the other thing I would say about the charter is that it is a call on government to act. Very often charters are a direct call with employers saying, we will adhere to X, Y, and Z. Right now, this is different. Every single one of our asks starts by saying the government should, right? The government should require all employers to report their pay gaps. You know, the government should increase disabled people's access to employment programs and so on. Now, these are actually quite strong statements for companies to be making, because if a company says, yeah, look, you should be introducing mandatory pay gap reporting, you know, we may not be doing it now, but you should be making us and others do it in a systematic way so that we've got comparable data across organisations that will enable us to develop industry and national sectoral benchmarks and so on. And if you go down this route, you may fear that there will be resistance from business. If you introduce more interventionist and more robust government policy, reforming access to work, reforming disability competent, whatever it is, you may fear that there is going to be business pushback on this. Now, by signing the charter, we're telling you there won't be. At least there won't be from us. In fact, we've actually now signed up to a charter, which means that we will be actively supporting your direction of travel. Now, that's actually quite a big statement for employers. Often employers don't like having stuff done to them. And this is a group of employers that are saying, that's absolutely fine. We understand the reason why this needs to be done, because individual employers will not necessarily engage with this agenda. Government absolutely should be leading on this. The current status quo has failed. A kind of a deregulatory approach whereby government is just simply exhorting employers to up their game. We need more robust policy, and this is exactly the sorts of things that you should be doing, and we will support you in introducing that. Now, that's a pretty strong statement for any business to make.
That's great. I'm really warmed by that, I guess. I'm going to throw in something that you remind me of. So one of our colleagues that was also joined the Access Advisory Board, he reminded me of it. Somebody I really also hold in high regard, another mischief maker, I'm going to say. His name's Michael Vershamish, and he's was the go-to-market manager for Microsoft. And one of the things that Microsoft committed to, which Kim was very, very involved in, for the audience here, is the disability confidence scheme.
Yeah.
And the disability confidence scheme has its challenges, but it also puts the conversation of disability employment and what it means and what we're afraid of onto the table of lots of organizations. It can be strengthened in many, many ways. I think that it hasn't been. But one thing that I'm reminded of is that when Microsoft signed up for it, there was an opportunity for them not just to become disability confident employers, but rather immediately disability confident leaders. And I suppose it makes sense for an organization to say, great, we're so excited that Microsoft has signed up to it, and not only have they pledged to it, but they've immediately become disability confident leaders. And what I really took heart from was when Michael Vershamish had said, I said no to that. I said, let us earn it. Don't just give us the badge because we're Microsoft and then we're going to get a lot of kudos, or the scheme is going to get kudos. Make us earn it. And I think that's really the heart of this part is make us earn it. Do you know that there are real intent by leaders to get this right, but there's real anxieties sometimes by the same leaders what it might mean to get it wrong. So earn it. Look into the heart of what makes it hard for a person to kill shame, to share their stories, to tell you how to widen your participation. Isn't always their job. There's a lot of emotional labor attached to reading and asking for things. So show how you care as an organization, not because it's good PR, but if it is, then use it. But at least sincerely demonstrate where you need to get better at it and say so. Because when you show vulnerability, you also create an invitation for others to share theirs. And collectively, you get to walk each other home in that space of what makes something wholesome and good and meaningful. So on this point, and I'm going to use the last slide, just say, look, that I'm excited by this conversation with Kim. I'm excited where the charter's going. I'm excited by the team that's involved in the Access Passport. I've put a link in the chat for you to sign up to it or to join Calling All Minds work. I really do think we need more people thinking about these things. Our passport isn't a silver bullet. The Access Passport isn't designed to be. But what it is a passport that a person can control. They get to choose what they put on it. They get to choose who sees it and even for how long. And they get to see the organization really being an ally. Not because they've just put the passport out there, but because the organization has a dashboard where they can see how many passports are being shared with them, how long these passports are taking to implement, and why it's quick and actually a return on investment, often just to say yes quickly. And being able to say yes quickly is a big heart of this battle, because often there's anxieties when you've made a request and you don't hear anything from 6 to 8 weeks, even when it's just a no. Then it's 6 and 8 weeks of worrying, thinking you've said too much. Perhaps you shouldn't have bothered. Perhaps you're at risk now. Maybe this is going to affect your promotion. We need to change this. So getting people to share their needs should not be so difficult. Getting people to recognize that these barriers that we address for individuals help us address more barriers for other individuals. It gets us ready for a future-ready workforce and people who are just here, just to be welcomed, not to be, I guess, navigated around, not to be endured, but to be welcomed, because it's a very part of the civil society that we build upon. So I'm going to end there and just thank him, really, and all of you listening to this here today. Really, the heartfelt that you put into this. And folks, you know, when the Charter in 5 or 10 years, and we look back at the Charter as part of everyday belonging, you'll see in 2025 you were a part of an early conversation that even Chris Martin had joined. And so, and that can't be bad. So I'm going to stop there and say thank you to Kim. Thank you for all of you joining me today. Please click on the LinkedIn and the Charter. There's a QR code there. Please do let us know. Play with the, well, at least sign up to see you can be part of the Access Passport as well. It's there. We are looking for as many people to join this work, for organizations to look at these approaches and just make an inclusion a thing they really do, not a thing they talk about, but a thing they really do. So that's it from me, and thank you. And my last words are to Kim, and just to say goodbye. And Kim, do you have any last before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, just thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your attention. Please do look at the Charter. We'd absolutely love to have you on board as signatories. So do take it back to your organisation.